Okay, we are in week 10 of our reading plan through the Gospel of John, and we've reached one of the most notoriously difficult chapters to read and interpret and understand. So we're going to do the best that we can. I'm going to read just a few details in the start of this story, like the first 2 paragraphs. And what I hope is as I'm recalling some of these details, there'll be another story that you've heard of that is being called to mind, a story that's in the Old Testament, really early on in the Old Testament. Okay, but listen to this. Jesus is crossing to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. He's crossing into a Gentile area that's up, it's called the Golan Heights. It's up on these mountaintops, and they're wilderness. That's important. They're drier parts of the Sea of Galilee. There's a great crowd of people following him. Jesus is leading this crowd. They see all the signs that he's performing. He goes up on a mountainside. He gathers them around. And the big question of this whole story is, how are we going to feed all of these people? There's not enough food to feed this people in the wilderness. Okay. Do you see it yet? Your mind should be immediately picturing the Exodus story. Moses leads the people from Egypt. They cross the sea, right? Remember, he sticks his staff in the ground and the waves part and they cross through the waters. He leads them through the wilderness to the mountain of Mount Sinai. And what's the big question while they're in the wilderness? All they want to know, all these people want to know is, how are we going to eat? And I get it, right? This is the first thing that comes to my mind too. Where's the food? How are we going to have enough to eat? That's the one thing that they're concerned with. God just rescued them from slavery and they're worried about their stomachs. And that's the same thing we see in this story. Jesus leads these people through the Sea of Galilee, into the wilderness, and up onto this mountaintop. And the whole question again in this story is, how are we going to feed them? Okay, why would John be trying to draw these 2 stories parallel to each other? What message is he trying to send? I think that John wants us to see Jesus as a new Moses type figure. Why? Well, Deuteronomy, the 5th book of the Torah, talked about a prophet that would come that would be even greater than Moses. And that when this prophet showed up on the scene, it would be like the people can finally be faithful again. This prophet is the one. He's the new and greater Moses who's going to lead the people into being faithful to God. Okay, that prophet John is trying to say is here and now. It's Jesus. So open your eyes and pay attention. Jesus is here. He's leading the people through the waters into the wilderness to reform them and shape them, just like God did through Moses in the original wilderness story of the Exodus. Except for this time, Jesus isn't leading the people from oppression of a foreign power in the world. The Jewish people were oppressed by Rome at the time, but Jesus isn't worried about freeing them from Roman oppression. He's worried about freeing them from a much more important form of oppression. Jesus is trying to get them to see that they are slaves to sin and death, this way he's been talking about in this gospel that leads to death, that leads to the wrong kind of life. And so he brings them into the wilderness symbolically in this story to try and show that he is reshaping God's people. He's going to reform them. And this isn't just me. Even John draws these connections himself. He tells us this is the time of the Jewish Passover festival. And so why would this people be in the wilderness during the Passover when they're supposed to be in Jerusalem? I think it's because he's trying to make this point. Jesus is the new and greater Moses, and he is pulling the people out of the spiritual oppression. He's leading them into the wilderness. And who provides manna this time around? Originally, God was the one who fed the people. He caused the manna to rain from heaven, and later the quail to come, so they even had meat to eat because they were upset they didn't have enough meat to eat. And here in this story, Jesus is the one who takes these elements that the little boy comes and brings him. He takes the barley loaves and the 2 fish, and he's going to give so that there is enough for everyone to eat. And we're told there were 12 basketfuls left over. 12 baskets for the 12 tribes of Israel. this story is an immediate connection to the Exodus story as God's people were rescued from slavery, because Jesus once again is trying to rescue God's people from slavery. And in 2 weeks, when we read the end of this chapter, that is going to become oh so apparent when Jesus talks about his role as being the bread of life. So I highly recommend, if you like spoilers, go and read that story this week if you have time. But for sure, when we get there 2 weeks from now, remember this story. Take notes so that you can see the full picture of what John is trying to do in this setup.